access also doesn't necessarily equate to maybe mobile access. It might not be like a mobile phone or smartphone, it might just be a computer in the house or in the neighborhood. So a couple of considerations when we think about non-traditional approaches. So we're an app, obviously. We have a website and we have a web app version as well, but typically speaking, we're focused in the app world. So that brings us to the main two stores for getting apps, which is the iOS App Store or the Google Android Play Store. So if you see here, there's some really interesting things. Specifically, 36 Asian languages are offered by the Google Store, and only 11 are offered by the iOS Store. So if you're thinking that you're an iOS-heavy app or something like that, it might actually make sense to just focus on these core languages, and this might actually be sufficient to reaching your potential users. However, if you're talking about the Play Store, and you really look at this, there are a lot of advantages to these. Some of these are regional, like in India, you see a lot of coverage on Indian languages. You have Punjabi, Marathi, Malayalam, what else do you have? Hindi, Bengali. Up here you have a few varieties of languages that you can offer, Tamil and Telugu. So you have a lot more potential to reach people within these markets. And then even another one that really stands out for me is the English India. And this one is very important for the market, whereas in the iOS App Store, only recently did they add, within the last few months, they added Hindi. Before that, you actually had no ability to reach iOS users in India directly in an App Store presence. So now it's kind of evolving, and then also the opportunities. So a couple of thoughts on connectivity. We're talking, Juliana mentioned a few minutes ago, internet penetration is quite high in Southeast Asia. It's specifically, about 59%. But what's more interesting to me in this regard, especially in the mobile app world, is the mobile connection is 141%. So to put that in perspective, let's say there are 1.5 phones, there are 1.5 phones for every person in Southeast Asia. To say that in another way, if you were to go outside, that'd be like everyone walking around with like 1.5 phones. It's kind of funny to think about, but it's like really interesting to think about how many actual mobile connections and how well this group is networked together. And then if you look across some of these regions, there are definitely some, there are different values, let's say. So for example, Juliana was talking about Indonesia, and we were looking at a lot of growth opportunity there. Whereas if you're looking at like Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, they're already highly connected internet markets, and also the unique mobile users are almost tied with the internet users. So if you look at unique mobile and internet users, this is almost, not exactly, but very close to being one-to-one, which is quite interesting. And then you look at social media, and you see it can almost be more, almost, not quite, but it's pretty high. So these groups of people are quite connected, and we see, Vietnam with 67% or Indonesia with 50%, but these are only, shall we say, the tip of the iceberg. We think that this trend will continue, and we think that there will be increasingly more people accessing apps, and not just apps, but anything on the internet. So it depends on what type of product you are. Your product will be available to more and more people as the internet evolves and as more people become connected. Oops, sorry.
And when you're thinking about like the next challenge, it's not only like the speed of internet or like whether everyone's actually getting coverage, but how is actually the quality of the speed of internet. But we can summarize as a latency, like as this region is actually a mobile first region, I can say something like that because everyone is actually having a mobile phone, even I'm using it right now. But the time spent on the attention in a mobile device is getting lesser and lesser because like there's a lot of like information that we have and what human trying to absorb. So this is also one of the considerations. Each of the part of the city can have like a different latency speed to the next city that the internet wants to go. So one of the interesting challenges as well that I'm trying to mention here with Andy is like if he wants to create a profitable business, it's not only talking about like internet connection, but it's supposed to be something like more real to the bottom line, right? So one of the key thing in Asia, doing business in Southeast Asia as well, is like a payment infrastructure. If you see here, like how big is Indonesia, how big we spoke about Malaysia and Singapore, but like the credit card penetration in Indonesia is only 2%, and Malaysia is like 10 times than that. And like if you compare to like the most developed country in Southeast Asia, which is Singapore, is 65%. So if you want to create a profitable business or like sizable business, this is one of the consideration as well that we need to think. And like Andy has mentioned about iOS and Android OS language availability, and I can tell you Southeast Asia is actually an Android market. So one of the key consideration as well, despite like the big population in Southeast Asia, it's outdated version, like how big is actually, how fast is actually the speed of adaptation of new user to actually buying a new device. I mean, like 25% of population in Southeast Asia still using an outdated Android OS version that launched in 2015, despite like the marketing span of, like, for example, Samsung, Oppo, Xiaomi is everywhere, but actually significant population that actually have a mobile phone still using an outdated version kind of thing. So that's one of the key considerations as well.
And this is all important with app size and things like this, because larger apps are not going to work very well in older versions of phones, and there's going to be a lot more problems, like technical problems, crashes, things like this, which can actually affect a lot of other things within your app, and so it's very important to keep these things in consideration. Okay, so now just to touch on a couple of things of Tinder in Asia, we thought we'd give you all a snapshot of what Tinder looks like in Asia. We offer multiple Asian languages. If I can do it from the top of my head, we have Korean, Japanese, Thai, Vietnamese, both Chinese, simplified and traditional, Bahasa Indonesian, Malay, and maybe I'm missing one, I don't know. And we have 4 Indian languages. We have Hindi, Bengali, Tamil, and Telugu. So we offer a pretty wide range of languages within this region, but we actually only have 4 market teams. So we have Juliano leading the Indonesian team. We actually have a team in Delhi in India. We have a marketing manager in Japan, in Tokyo, and then we have a small team of 3 people in Korea, in Seoul. And all of these people, Juliano kind of touched on it earlier, but there's like a working relationship with the headquarters, but they're also focusing on their markets, and they're kind of focused on growing their markets specifically, and maybe even regionally, if applicable. So these are somewhat, I guess, autonomous, but they're more kind of having some eyes on the ground, if you will, for the region. Here are a couple of examples of just how the imagery can change for Tinder across the different locales. So we'll start, we have Malay, we have Indonesian, Thai, and Vietnamese. And so this just kind of shows you how, you can't really see the other pictures, I guess, but you can kind of see how it might look different depending on the region, and also the user base that's within that region. Because a lot of our content within the app is actually user-driven. It's not really something that we're pushing forward. So a lot of what you see is actually dependent on the user itself. So like chat is user-specific. All these chats are users. Names would be user-specific. But all of this content, like here, are all like user interface content, which would change obviously by language. Okay, so just the next couple of slides are just really images, just to kind of show you how the presentation might change, or the way that we look a little bit, the feel maybe changes. So here's Japanese, obviously a lot more social focused. It's more, you have dating, but you also have yourself, you have meeting people, cultural experiences, you have a lot of different things going on here. Here is a campaign that was very successful in India, actually. It's called Start Something Epic. Possibly some of you have seen the YouTube videos, but if you haven't, if you wanted to search Tinder India or something, you would actually see a lot of these videos, and it's quite interesting campaigns, and the way they executed these. It's very interesting. Here is a recent campaign from the Korea team. It's kind of showcasing really the idea of the opportunity to get to know different types of people for any reason. Maybe for going for a beer, going for a bike ride, learning a new language, like all these different things. And it's really coming together with this mindset of social opportunities that exist in this age that haven't really existed before, because of apps like Tinder and things like this that allow people to connect that might not have been able to meet before. And so,
yeah, I think like this slide, this part of the slide that I'm going to talk about is actually very interesting for the room, I guess, because when you did the sales pitch to the brand, is like really important. So on the upside is actually our preview of the app. in US or globally. But if you the bottom side is actually the localized version for Indonesia specific. So I'm working this side by side with Andy on how we actually can see an impact of the localization to the bottom line of the company. So I can tell you, after we did localization version for Indonesia, the numbers of download in the time of period there is no marketing spend on Indonesia can have a significant business impact with more downloads, single digit to double digit. So this is actually very, very important, and I just want to mention like how important is actually localization for a tech company like Tinder.
Yeah, just a quick note on this, and this is not, this could be any language, it can be anything, and it's very important across all markets. And not just that, but this, as I mentioned before, we have to consider discoverability. So you might have a great product, but it's very difficult unless people can find the product. And this is one of the best ways for people to actually find your product, is to do these kind of localizations, because this is organic. You're not necessarily having to buy these users. So it's important to think about these kind of considerations.
So when we're thinking about this, I think this slide it's really matter for me as a marketer, like context, how actually we can work together as a team with Andy and also product to actually really understand localization and internationalization for a specific market like Southeast Asia. So like the reason I showed you the result at first is actually I just want to like make it clear on like product can create an innovation, or like can create like a localization innovation for certain market. But brand as a marketer, maybe they have like another brand direction, and localization has their expertise. So we really need to sync up and work together side by side in actually creating a good bottom line for the company. And this is also one of the examples, like why local context is actually matter, and why working across localization, product and marketing, especially in market, is actually matters. I mean, like this is an example in an English context, a Malay context, and a Vietnamese context. If we are not working together, maybe we're gonna create a mess in the user experience. So this is like just a simple example, but really matter to our users.
Yeah, so this last couple of slides here, I just wanted to touch on a few things that are common for us. Some of this might be boring if you've been in localization for a while, but still something that continues to come up even though it's simple. One of them would be text length. So if you see here, the source English has 19 characters. If we look at Korean, we'd see around 13, and then Malay up to 32. Now the 32 is a substantial increase. You can see just the length of these strings, but also just the text space that might come up. Now, why this is interesting is because if you're looking at Asian languages and you look at Japanese, Japanese actually has 15 characters, so less than the source English for us, but it actually takes up more space. Now, all of these things can present a lot of design challenges for your team, so it's very important to take these into consideration when you're thinking about differences between the products. So here's an example, this is one of our screens, but you can see the English, the Malay, and the Thai. Having good libraries is very important as well, making sure that you're accounting for the differences across cultures, and this is a very simple example of date formatting. But if we're thinking about maybe text direction, maybe we're talking about the length of the text like earlier, maybe we're talking about how it should be showing like one after the other, there are a lot of differences, and so making sure that you have libraries that support your different currencies, different date formats, different scripts, pretty much anything that might come up on the internationalization side. It's very important to do this from the start of your product, or else you're going to have consistent issues that are going to just almost haunt you as you continue to develop your product. So this might make a few people in the room like bring back a horror story or something like that, but concatenation, we're still talking about this in this day, it is still a problem. It's very simple, but it comes up all the time. Engineers love to do concatenation, but I would say separating strings does not equal a good idea, and the reason for that is just because when we look at the differences between languages and kind of like the sentence structure, you might have this order for English and Indonesian. You might have subject or object of a verb, and then you go completely different for another language. So consider these kind of things and think about, before you have this idea to like concatenate strings, really think about trying to make strings fit together and have them like consistent across your platform so you don't run into this problem. Because if you're an app, if you're a website, and you do intend to go global, especially even within the Asian markets, you will run into this problem if you concatenate. It's gonna be there for you. Now, how does this play out? This is a pretty simple example, but let's imagine that we're saying that someone was recommended by the user, but in Indonesian, this stays consistent as far as sentence structure goes. However, when we look at Korean, the user actually comes first, and then recommended by, or so Korean could possibly help me with that one. But so when you look at this, you actually see that if we were to take away this placeholder and we were to concatenate the original string here, so we take this out and then we put the user back in with the translation from Korean, it would actually be grammatically incorrect because the user would be at the end of the sentence when it should be at the beginning. So by concatenating in situations like this, we actually run into consistent problems. Now this is a very simple example, but this is, I think on the next slide, there's a better example that helps to illustrate why this is problematic and how it can be a headache for a localization team. So here is the example. So a couple of things here. So this is the original, it's a swipe search, and if any of you are familiar with Uber, or maybe Grab does the same thing where there's this kind of idea of surge pricing when things are very busy. Tinder does something similar to that. When there are a lot of active users on the platform in a specific city, we do something called a swipe search. So we'll say it's a swipe search, Los Angeles. But the problem is the design. I actually think it looks pretty nice. It's got a good color, it's got a good font to it. But the problem is these brackets here, this line, it's actually two separate things. And then also these three things are actually separate strings. So it's, swipe search, and Los Angeles are three separate strings in this design. So if you look here, this is disastrous in a way. For Indonesian, it actually works okay, but it's still too big. It's outside of the brackets, right? So there's no allowance for space. But then when we consider Korean, it looks terrible because of the brackets actually don't adjust, so the Korean is going off the screen. But then also, going back to the original part about sentence structure, as we know from the previous slide, sentence structure is very important for certain languages that are not from your source. If they're very different from your source, then there's a possibility that the sentence structure will be different. And in this case, when you have three separate strings, it's exactly what happens. So this actually should have been at the end, and swipe search should have been probably at the top, or even Los Angeles. But it should have been different, and that would have affected font, or font size, or text size. That would have affected color. That would have affected placement, I guess. So there are a couple of different things here. And we weren't able, so what we ended up doing was, obviously this shrinks now to adjust for the difference in text length. But this actually is more just like saying, like hello, or like get excited. It's not so much about it's actually more focused on the idea that
Nhưng mà nhìn trong này nó cũng đâu có ấy đâu.
This is just an example from our side about how these kind of things can be problematic. The last thing, I don't think it's going to work, but there's actually a video, and if not, maybe you'll just get it on the slides later. I might be able to play it. I'll try that. But in the meantime, we're really excited to be here. It's really cool this is my first time in Asia. I don't know if anybody else is just coming here for the first time. It's really exciting to be here, and an honor to present for all of you. So, terima kasih, anyone from here. But thank you for having us, and we would really love to talk. That's actually my favorite part, and I think Juliana as well. We really like to talk to people and engage. So, if you have any questions, we'd be happy to talk now, follow up later, or whatever. But yeah, so questions, anybody?
So you had the slides with your 4 considerations for which markets to enter, how to make a decision.
Yeah.
Then you kind of left off the second part, which was after you considered those things, what did it mean to you? What did you take away from that data, and how did it shape your decisions as you've been in Asia?
I think that would be a fantastic question. with $1 million answer. But I think the way we put like consideration and the key habits I put there with Andy, it's sort of like everyone work in progress right now. So that's sort of the things that if you're mentioning like what would be the action forward for Tinder or for me as a marketer and as a country manager, it's going to be like number one, it's supposed to be like talk to the product team on what would be the condition in Southeast Asia, and literally just like how we can maximize the current challenge to actually answer our business bottom line kind of thing. So it's still a work in progress, and I think it's applicable for all the startup in Southeast Asia, or even if this kind of thing is still applicable for a big tech company like Facebook or Google. So this is like everyone's problem.
Yeah, and just to touch on that too, I think that the strategy would probably depend on the company because there are a lot of factors. I don't know, one of them that really stands out was like the presentation yesterday about the Indian languages, the complex script. There were a lot of interesting points in there, and I think that actually resonates with the rest of the world. When you consider who is your target market, are you looking at necessarily like an elite? Are you looking at a mass market? Are you looking at a specific niche within that market, like maybe religious or whatever the case may be? And I think all of those factors actually kind of help to push you in the direction of what you do with these considerations. So considerations are a big part of it. As kind of going back to what we started with was the opportunity. The opportunities are there depending on the type of product you have, and that's going to change completely. So for us as a dating, social discovery, lifestyle app, depending, it's going to be a lot of like there's going to be a specific focus on that of like the social opportunities, connectivity, the demographics maybe even. But if you're talking about like a Google, more of a mass market tech approach, you're looking at getting more people on email, more people on your Google Drive products, and etc. So I think it's a completely different strategy, but using the same information to start with. That helps. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for the presentation. Questions/notes, I'm not sure exactly. So you had one of the slides about the internet penetration in different areas. Yeah.
This one?
Yeah, well, this one, you had several. So something that I used in the past, and also to show the internet penetration and how many percentage of the internet users in the world in this area. And actually I showed starting at 2000. And those are good news for Asia and bad news, let's say, for the US, because in the US actually the internet penetration today are 1995, and we are 1% of the internet users in the world. Something like that. I cannot remember the exact number. But I think this really shows that there's a real opportunity. And we need to understand that it's a growing trend. You know, I don't know currently the percentage of internet users in Asia of the world, but it's already big, and the penetration is what, about 59, or I don't know the number you said. So it just shows that this market can just double itself.
In a very short period of time, and it already has. For people that have been here for some time in the Asian markets, they've probably seen substantial changes in the last 10 or 15, 20 years. And I think that trend is only going up.
Yeah, and as you said, it's a mobile first.
Yes.
Which is very important.
And I think what's really interesting about the growth of, when you're talking about any growth, and specifically internet growth in Southeast Asia, it's not growing linear, but it's exponential. Yeah. So it's sort of like a very, very interesting fact for Southeast Asia right now.
Okay. I'm just curious, how much has Tinder changed since it entered Asia? And in terms of the visibility, for example, and have there been any takeaways from entering this market that kind of shaped the global look and feel?
Yeah, so that's a real interesting question. Fundamentally, I'd say that we haven't changed significantly, and the reason I say that is because we have a different focus than a lot of other companies that are in a similar category with us, is that Tinder is focused on simplicity. We're focused on, you can download the app right now in this room, and you can be potentially matching and chatting with people within about 1 minute. You can just download. After you download, you get in, enter your phone number or connect with the social media, and you can be online. And so that factor is one of the real things I think it's like keeping in mind is that. So we don't want to get away from that, I guess. But we've seen like with the let me go back over here. So this specifically, if you really look at what they're doing in Korea, and I know that's not specific to Southeast Asia, but maybe Juliana has some thoughts on that, but what they're really, this is a whole different idea, it's a different approach to using the app. It's not so much focused on, like a one-on-one date necessarily. It's focused more on meeting people, or like going out and having new social experiences, and even, it could be with a group, it could be with one person, it could be with, whatever, 10 people. So it's a different approach, and the product, I think, is evolving to that, but it's, as of now, it's like the app is still focused on its original core idea, which was simplicity. So we try not to get too far away from that, because that's what, I guess, has made it successful in a way. Yeah.
Hey, I have a question. Great presentation, thank you. With the 4 or 5 screenshots that you had on there, and we could only see the first one, it kind of made me think about something that the Netflix Indonesia folks said yesterday, and they had kind of a unique product issue in that they had a team that would look at titles and things like that, and when to translate it and when not to. And I was just curious, when you had your triangle and you had your different groups and the folks on the ground, how does that conversation go? How does that kind of back and forth go with the local teams versus your overall marketing team in terms of what to translate, what not to translate, what to look like? I mean, I would imagine it's a match. I was looking at this, and so the first one is translated. And then in the other languages, it just has it's a match, which I would imagine your tagline is a similar title sort of situation where it's very product specific and unique to you, and you have to very much think about when you translate it and when you don't. And then on this one, actually on that one, it was translated, I think.
Yeah, this
I'm not
is the
really
same
sure.
as the first one. Yeah.
Oh, I see, okay. So I was just curious, just if you had any kind of thoughts on that.
Yeah, so great question. This has been the source of a lot of conversations, a lot of just back and forth, a lot of who has the authority on this, a lot of this. So first of all, I think the core of that was developing some kind of glossary that was in-country approved. So for example, we have a glossary for Bahasa Indonesian, and Juliano's going to review it with me, and he's going to make some decisions about how we're going to call certain products within the app. I've had many conversations with localization professionals and talking about terminology, and it's a really interesting thing because it changes by company in a way that you have to decide. You have to consciously make a decision if you're okay leaving the source, whatever your source language is, or if you need to like adapt. Because there are a couple of focuses, right? If you adapt it, you have the ability to like reach the people in a more effective way, right? Because the product might resonate better with them with a good name. However, if you don't, or I'm sorry, if you do, you're gonna lose the branding of that product feature, right? So you might have 50 different names for the same product feature, which is a challenge because you can't market it as the same product. However, when it comes to those kind of things, there's also the idea that they'll leave it in English if you're a Western company, which I personally do not like. I don't like that approach to things. At the same time, it's hard to make an adaptation for everything and make everyone agree on it. So I don't know how to answer it directly, but I'll do the best I think the approach that we take generally is a flexible approach, but we've recently kind of gone back on one thing you pointed out was the it's a match here. We actually had that localized for a while in many different languages, and I think it was effective, but the thing that we kind of decided that we lost was the iconic, like, it's a match is just fundamentally part of Tinder, in the same way that, like, another tagline, like, just do it might be for Nike, it's a match is for us. So we actually kind of reverted, in a sense, to going back to it's a match for all languages. However, if you'll see on some of them, they might have a localized version near it. So it might be like the iconic, it's a match, but then there might be something else near it that kind of gives it a little local flair. Other things like, so this has been a really interesting one because the approaches vary by language. So even the word like, if you look at anything, like all social media now has some kind of form of like or thumbs up or whatever the case may be. So you kind of can look at industry standards for that, like what have other people that have gone before you done? So like thinking about someone's gonna identify immediately as the same action as another app that they might be using or another product. So you might want to be consistent with that. But then on the same time, it's also the brand again, going back to it's a match versus a like or a note. So you have the plural, by the way, this is like the pluralized 25 likes, but it's not easy because then you get to a language like, for Russian, we've actually transliterated. So it'll say like, but in Russian script, Cyrillic script. So that's kind of, it depends where, because there's a difference between imagery, something like this, and then the actual usage in the app. So for example, like push notifications or the user interface and stuff. So it's actually a very interesting question. We could probably talk about it for a couple of hours. But I would say that just to kind of summarize it, there's not an easy answer, and I think you have to make a conscious decision, whatever. But one last point on that, you mentioned how do the teams work together, and I want to comment on that. So I would say that anything language related goes through me. So it's like localization questions. So like let's say we have a new product feature, product A, and they're going to come to me and say, what do we do with product A in other languages? So I might get a first pass from translators, or I might go to the in-country teams first and ask them to help me develop how this should look in their language, and then we'll get that standardized, get it put into the translation system, the CAT tools, and then have that glossary implemented on any text that's translated associated with that. Product would kind of talk with me about that, the localization side, and I would kind of talk to in-country teams or marketers, and the marketers would follow kind of what the language suggestions are. So it's kind of a little bit of the relationship we're looking at. But we can talk about it more if you need. Anybody else?
I think we have time for one more question.
I have a minor linguistic question for you.
Sure.
You mentioned that it's not a good idea to separate strings. If you could show that slide. I was just wondering, SOV or SVO are the recognized patterns.
Sorry.
I'm just wondering about the VSO one, because I don't know much about the languages you mentioned. Can you give an example illustrating VSO order?
I don't off the top of my head know, to be honest, but I know that there are the three main sentence structures. The most common two, I think they cover pretty much all, like most common localization translated languages, I think would be these, but these might also include indigenous languages and languages that are not so common in the text space. I can look one up for you in the next couple of minutes and I'll let you know, but I don't actually know VSO.
Mấy dịch nó chia ra thành từng bộ luôn đấy.
But I know that, like, for example,
Face-based.
SOV,
SVO are probably the ones that who's not quite sure about VSO, because any language like this. Okay, thank you.
If we have a quick one, we can do one more.
So in different countries, stickers and emoticons, especially for dating, I imagine would be really different. You guys, I mean, it's not language, but do you guys localize all that stuff? Is that under you?
Yes and no. Not in the way that you both presented and Joy presented yesterday. The idea is kind of about having these interchangeable imagery, like where you can add the text or decide which they want to use it. It goes in like that. We wouldn't do something so much because we don't really get involved in the personal chats between people. A lot of the personal chats is very much on them. So in the case of, I don't know if I don't have a chat screen, but in the case of a chat, we actually have let me see if I have it on the main screen. There's a Giphy icon, but it's basically like an integration into our app. It's not something we're giving. It's allowing people to go into a third party, like Giphy, and so it's actually more how well is Giphy localized, not us. And so it depends on their phone languages, on how they're searching, and all this kind of stuff. But it's actually going to go through Giphy. We're not providing GIFs or anything like that. Yeah.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you all. And if anybody would like to chat later or something, feel free to come grab us. And, yeah.